Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Karen Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
Karen, let's begin with the latest from the campaign trail. With just 11 days left until the election, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are pulling out all the stops. The vice president rallied supporters last night in Georgia and seized on criticism of the former president from his former chief of staff, John Kelly.
Take a moment to think about what that means. That Trump said, quote, Hitler did some good things. And that Trump wished he had generals like Hitler's who would be loyal to Trump and not to America's Constitution.
Vice President Harris was joined on stage for the first time by former President Barack Obama.
Now, I want to explain that in politics, a good rule of thumb is don't say you want to do anything like Hitler.
And along with former President Obama, Bruce Springsteen appeared with Harris at the Georgia rally. But perhaps the biggest celebrity backing for the vice president will come today when Beyoncé joins Kamala Harris at a rally in her hometown of Houston, Texas.
Well, Nathan, former President Trump has denied making those comments about Hitler. He held a rally last night in Tempe, Arizona, where he rallied against Harris over the migrant crisis.
We're a dumping ground. We're like a garbage can for the world. That's what's happened. That's what's happened to her. We're like a garbage can. You know, it's the first time I've ever said that.
Earlier, Donald Trump told a conservative radio show that he would fire special counsel Jack Smith, quote, within 2 seconds if he returns to the White House. Smith is appealing his classified documents case against Trump, and he's filed revised charges in the 2020 election interference case after the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity.
And Trump continues to get big donations, Karen, from Elon Musk. The billionaire gave another $56 million to Trump and other Republicans in the final weeks of the 2024 race. Musk has spent at least $132 million to elevate his allies to the White House and Congress.
Well, Nathan, the world's richest man may be looking to extend his influence even further to geopolitics. According to a report in the Wall Street Journal, Elon Musk has been in regular contact with Russian President Vladimir Putin for nearly 2 years. Sources tell the Journal their conversations have touched on business, geopolitics, and personal matters. In one case, Putin reportedly asked Musk not to activate his Starlink satellite internet over Taiwan as a favor to Chinese President Xi Jinping. Musk did not respond to requests for comment on the Journal report, but in the past, he said it's absurd to think that he's a Putin apologist and his companies have done more to undermine Russia than anything.
Meanwhile, Karen, Elon Musk's wealth soared following blowout earnings from Tesla. Musk added $33.5 billion to his net worth yesterday after shares of the electric vehicle maker surged 22% for its biggest gain in more than a decade. Musk's wealth gain brought his fortune to more than $270 billion. $61 billion ahead of second place, Jeff Bezos.
Well, Nathan, it's also a big day for the head of Microsoft. CEO Satya Nadella received a pay package worth more than $79 million this year. That's a 63% increase from the prior year. About 90% of Nadella's compensation was in Microsoft shares.
And we have even more C-suite news this morning, Karen. Morgan Stanley CEO Ted Pick is about to become chairman of the board. That's expected in January, and we get more on that from Bloomberg's Doug Krisner.
Pick will replace James Gorman. Back in May, Gorman said he would step down as chairman at the end of the year, and Pick was expected to replace him in that role. In a nod of respect, Morgan Stanley said Gorman will take on the title of chair emeritus after leaving the board. Pick took over from Gorman as CEO at the start of the year, and a little over a week ago, Morgan Stanley reported results above expectations with a record quarter in wealth management. Under Pick, Morgan Stanley shares have climbed nearly 28% this year. In New York, I'm Doug Krisner, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Doug, thank you. There's some stocks on the move this morning. Shares of Capri Holding, they are plunging down more than 45%. A federal judge has blocked its planned $8.5 billion takeover by retail rival Tapestry. The judge froze the deal after concluding it would harm competition in the market for accessible luxury handbags. Tapestry, which makes Coach and Kate Spade handbags, currently is up 13.5% this morning.
And the strike at Boeing drags on, Karen, after unionized workers rejected enacted a labor deal with generous pay packages. Bloomberg's John Tucker's here now with the update. So, John, the workers seem to be banking on pensions, huh?
And it's a long shot, Nathan. 10 years ago, the pensions were removed at Boeing. And Jane Jacobs, a labor law expert, tells Bloomberg employees want to go back to traditional pension plans, but they're asking for a dinosaur. The pensions fell out of favor on Wall Street decades ago after repeated economic downturns left employers feeling trapped. And now members of the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers appear to be holding out. On Wednesday, they rejected the proposed 4-year agreement that would have guaranteed 35% wage increases and enhanced 401k benefit matches. In the meantime, the pressure keeps building. Boeing isn't producing any civilian aircraft besides the 787 Dreamliner, which is made at a different site that doesn't have union representation. In New York, I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thanks. So we're also following the E. coli outbreak that's impacting McDonald's and other fast food chains. Burger King and Yum Brands, which owns Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and KFC, removed onions from some of their locations yesterday. The restaurant industry is on alert after the CDC said an E. coli outbreak likely tied to pre-slivered onions served on McDonald's Quarter Pounders sickened dozens of people in the U.S. and killed one.
And finally, Karen, after 8 months in space, 4 astronauts are back on Earth.
And Endeavor, we see the same. On behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
That was the sound from SpaceX this morning after the company's capsule with a crew of 3 American astronauts and 1 Russian cosmonaut on board parachuted into the Gulf of Mexico. Their mission lasted 235 days, 3 hours, and 35 minutes, during which the space station circled the globe 3,776 times. That covers 100 million miles. These astronauts were supposed to be back on Earth 2 months ago. They were delayed by capsule trouble for Boeing's Starliner and Hurricane Milton.
And it's time now for a look at some of the other stories making news in New York and around the world. And for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Michael Barr. Michael, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. Eric and Lyle Menendez are being recommended for resentencing with the eligibility for parole for the 1989 murders of their parents. Los Angeles County District Attorney George Gascon says he's recommending their release under California's youthful parole law.
I'm recommending that they be released because I believe that the people that they were at age 19 and 21 is not the same people that we're seeing 35 years later.
Defense lawyer Mark Garagos represents the brothers.
These boys need to come home, and today is a monumental victory on that path.
The brothers said they feared their parents were about to kill them to stop people from finding out that Jose Menendez had sexually abused Eric Menendez for years. A judge will need to go along with Gascon's recommendation, and then a parole board must approve. The final stop is with the California governor, who could reject the board's decision. Gaza health officials say an Israeli strike this morning killed 38 people in Khan Yunis. It comes as another Israeli strike on a compound housing journalists in southeast Lebanon killed 3 media staffers. Army officials said a person of interest has been taken into custody in connection to the suspected murder of a soldier at Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri. The body of 23-year-old Sergeant Sarah Roque was found earlier this week in a dumpster. Army Major General Christopher Beck.
The Department of the Army Criminal Investigation Division is investigating her death as a potential homicide. They are working closely with the FBI and other law enforcement agencies.
Major General Beck. President Biden traveled to Arizona to issue an apology to the Native American community for the federal government's role in removing Native children from their homes to send them to abusive boarding schools for decades. It follows an investigation launched by Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland.
For more than a century, tens of thousands of indigenous children, as young as 4 years old, were taken from their families and communities and forced into boarding schools run by the U.S. government and religious institutions.
The investigation found at least 973 children died in schools across dozens of states and territories. Global news 24 hours a day, and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg, Karen.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you. Time now now for the Bloomberg Sports Update, brought to you by Tri-State Audi. Here's John Stashower. John.
All right, Karen, it's a night Yankee fans have been waiting for 15 years. A drought that matched the longest in Yankee history for time between World Series games. They start their 41st World Series. That's still more than a third of all the fall classics. They're going for their 28th championship, and they have their ace on the mound tonight. Garrett Cole will face the Dodgers.
You obviously know of the talent and know of the prowess of the other team and how they can swing the bat with high efficacy. I think that they are going to get their hits at some point this series. They are good players, and they obviously have played really well to this point.
The Dodgers have an offense that just scored 37 runs in their 4 NLCS wins over the Mets. They have a deep bullpen, but they're without 4 injured starting pitchers, and they tonight go with Jack Flaherty. 7 scoreless innings in Game 1 against the Mets, but in his 2 other postseason starts, Flaherty gave up 12 runs. Week 8 also began in L.A. The Rams took their first lead with 2.5 minutes left, third quarter. They beat the Vikings 30-20. Matthew Stafford, 4 touchdown passes, Minnesota's second loss after starting 5-0. Last spring, the Panthers ended the Rangers season, then won the Stanley Cup, and last night, Florida also won. 3-1 at the Garden, where tonight the Knicks take on the team that ended their season, the Indiana Pacers. Knicks blown out in their opener in Boston. Celtics last night won in Washington, 122-102. Dallas won its opener. Klay Thompson's debut with the Mavs. He made 6 three-pointers. The ex-Knick, Julius Randle, 33 points for Minnesota in a win at Sacramento. College football, Pittsburgh now 7-0, 41-13 over Syracuse, whose quarterback Kyle McCord threw 5 interceptions. There were 3 pick sixes. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports. Karen and Nathan.
Coast to coast on Bloomberg Radio, nationwide on Sirius XM, and around the world on Bloomberg.com and the Bloomberg Business app. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. With 11 days till the election, both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are turning the heat up on each other on the campaign trail.
Donald Trump has become more confused, more unstable, and more angry.
Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? I don't think so.
The former president rallied his supporters last night in Las Vegas, while the vice president was campaigning in the Atlanta area with former President Obama and Bruce Springsteen in tow. Joining us this morning to talk about the race are Bloomberg's Derek Wallbank and Kevin Whitelaw. Good morning to both of you. Derek, where does the race stand with 11 days out?
Nathan, we are sitting and dancing on the tip of a pin right now. It is very, very close in the presidential race, and across the key swing states, we are seeing a lot of tightness in polls. We're seeing signs that are good for both sides in the early vote, depending on what you're looking at. And right now, as you just played in those clips, you're seeing Kamala Harris and Donald Trump targeting very similar audiences. A lot of this final pitch is geared at voters who are a very, very thin slice of the electorate. It's that group that isn't really sure about either of them, maybe doesn't like either of them, not necessarily confident about where the economy is, but not necessarily confident about throwing Donald Trump back into the White House again. So you are seeing those pitches, a lot of high negatives about the opponents, a lot of contrast, because this really could go any sort of way. It's entirely plausible that Donald Trump wins with more than 300 electoral votes. It's entirely plausible Kamala Harris does the same. And it's also critically entirely plausible that we are waiting for days, plural, maybe even a week or more, to figure out what the actual result was.
Let's bring Kevin Whitelaw into this conversation. We've heard in just these last few hours, Kevin, Kamala Harris seizing on these reports in the Atlantic and the New York Times that former President Trump has said nice things about Adolf Hitler. And at the same time, we're hearing from former President Trump calling the U.S. a garbage can because of what's at the border. The negatives really seem to be ramping up in these final days.
Yeah, well, obviously, as we enter this home stretch, I think both candidates are looking to try to, figure out what their closing messages are, and obviously at this point, I think, for Kamala Harris, one of those strong messages that I think that her people think can move people towards her is just a reminder of just sort of why so many people did get moved away from Donald Trump and are going to have trouble voting for him. And so I think this sort of Hitler sort of set of remarks has been obviously well timed as far as Kamala Harris is concerned, but it does sort of have a pretty stark contrast. The headline on Bloomberg right now is Springsteen Obama rally for Harris, Trump denies Hitler remarks. Normally, this would suggest that one campaign is perhaps doing better than the other, but as Derek was saying, this one is so close that you're ultimately dealing with only a very tiny number of true undecideds, and for the most part, it's really just about getting people motivated to vote, comfortable to vote, and ready to pull the lever for one or the other.
And to that point, on top of the Bloomberg News Morning Consult poll that showed just how tight the race is in all 7 swing states, you've got a new New York Times Siena College national likely voter poll that shows Kamala Harris and Donald Trump at 48% apiece. What does this say, Derek? Derek, about where things could go in this next week and a half? I mean, is there any room for either side to make a mistake here?
Nathan, I think Kevin said it right. It's a lot about turning out your voters at this point, right? Kamala Harris is going to be looking to try and drive particularly women to the poll. We've seen in some special elections after the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision on abortion, an overperformance among Democrats in down ballot races that they're really hoping can translate here. And you are seeing in some early votes some indications that women are coming out in quite high numbers. At the same point, Donald Trump is going to be is doing, I think, far better than many people expected at turning out some rural voters, especially in Georgia, especially in North Carolina. So there is going to be a sort of like trying to pastiche this together, because you are trying to get the votes out in these very specific constituencies, in these very specific, sort of state borders. If you're in North Carolina, on the western edge of North Carolina, your vote is going to matter a lot more than somebody on the very eastern tip of Tennessee, right? That's just sort of the way the U.S. works in elections like this. And they're very clear about this. They know all of this. What I would say is that, and it's important for people to look at when they're looking at the map, a general tie vote is probably better for Donald Trump once you get to states, because the Electoral College has a little bit, the way the votes are going right now, a little bit of a hum towards the GOP. So a tie in a national vote is probably better news for Donald Trump than it is for Kamala Harris.
And to the point about this race sort of turning into a national conversation here, Kevin, we're going to see Vice President Harris holding a rally later today in the non-swing state of Texas, joined by Beyonce, ramping up star power once again. And former President Trump this weekend is going to be holding a rally at Madison Square Garden. What do you make of the final stage strategy here, focusing not just on the swing states, but bringing this to a more national audience?
Well, I think when you can get Beyonce, you go to Beyonce. You don't ask her to come to you. So I think in this case, Kamala Harris is trying to harness whatever she can by way of the star wattage that has been coming out for her. Well, obviously, Bruce Springsteen, Barack Obama, we've seen, and I think James Taylor was with Tim Walz, and now you do have Beyonce. So I think that probably says more just about the straight logistics of making that happen, because obviously they are looking for ways to make sure that people see her appeal across a number of different demographics. For Trump, I think it's always been about the high-profile, high-splash sort of moments, and playing Madison Square Garden is a way, I think, for him to sort of rally the base as watching him enter what obviously is otherwise a Democratic stronghold.
And of course, Donald Trump has his own star power in the form of the world's richest man, Elon Musk. And now there's this report in the Wall Street Journal that Musk has been in regular contact, apparently, with Russian President Vladimir Putin for at least 2 years now. Derek, does that have any impact on the race, do you think, this report that Elon Musk is trying to dive even deeper into geopolitics?
Well, I'm not really sure how much of an impact that's going to have in terms of turning actual votes right now, because it's kind of hard to see how many votes are out there moving because of proxies. To Kevin's point, right, you use the proxies that you have, and Musk has been a huge Donald Trump proxy, but they're sort of giving awareness. And ultimately, that voting ballot choice is between, Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, not between Elon Musk and Taylor Swift. Right. But it does highlight a sort of sensitivity on the governing side and in terms of how it affects Musk's own business lines. Right. He is, among other things, a massive, massive government contractor in a whole lot of ways, from Starlink and internet service to the SpaceX and spaceflight and all manner of other things. Right. And to the degree that Harris wins, you can imagine additional scrutiny onto all of those business lines. To the degree that Trump wins, you can imagine perhaps substantially less scrutiny and maybe even more incentives towards there. So somebody like Elon Musk, and Musk has said this himself in some words, it has a lot riding on this race.
Got about a minute left, Kevin. Your take on the Elon Musk Wall Street Journal report, what it could mean potentially with Elon Musk looking for a potential position in a Trump administration.
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately this is probably more of an issue going forward for both Musk's companies, but also, as you say, but the possibility has been talked about for him to have an official role in the administration. I mean, I think for folks who've been watching, Donald Trump and his stance toward Russia and his remarks about sort of where the war in Ukraine should end up, I think this certainly only adds to a set of concerns that a Trump administration, particularly if it had Musk in it, would potentially shift U.S. policy towards Russia quite substantially. But in the meantime, there's also raises some very interesting questions about sort of security clearances, which obviously Musk and his company have for some of the various sensitive operations that they do with the U.S. military and very likely with the intelligence community. So it would definitely spark levels of concern in a number of different areas.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak, your morning podcast on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed by 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else you listen.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 92.9 in Boston, and nationwide on Sirius XM Channel 121.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, now with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto interfaces.
And don't forget to subscribe to Bloomberg News Now. It's the latest news whenever you want it, in 5 minutes or less. Search Bloomberg News Now on your favorite podcast platform to stay informed all day long. I'm Karen Moscow.
And I'm Nathan Hager. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.